On today's show, how does Steven Adams help the Houston Rockets this upcoming season? What kind of impact do we expect him to have, and what will his role be on this team? It's all coming up on today's Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Now, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5, just $5, and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. Joining us now is a very special guest. If you're watching on YouTube, it's not actually Steven Adams, as exciting as that would be to have Steven Adams on the show. Who we do have joining us, though, is Steven Adams Stats. You can follow him on Twitter at FunakiStats. And Funaki, this is going to be an awesome episode because you have been following Steven Adams throughout his career. So, you know, we're going to get kind of a deep dive and a look into what Steven Adams could potentially bring to the Houston Rockets this season. We'll dive into things, you know, areas of his game that really stand out, like his passing, his screening, his rebounding. And then we'll also talk a little, you know, about his future and, you know, potentially could the Rockets trade him a little bit further down the line. But first off, excited to have you on the program, man. How you doing? Yeah,
good, Jackson. Thanks for having me on. I've been listening to you guys for a while, so it's nice to be able to chip in and have a focus on Steven Adams. So thanks for calling me in.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to preface this and make sure everybody knows that your bio on Twitter reads evidence-based Steven Adams propaganda. So I expect a lot of evidence-based Steven Adams propaganda on today's show. And again, I think that, you know, when I was thinking about, okay, well, before we get to the season, we need to do a quick deep dive on Steven Adams for fans who are a little bit unfamiliar with his game. And I thought to myself, well, I could reach out to my Locked On Grizzlies guys or even my Locked On Thunder guy. But the unique thing for you is you've been following him for the majority of his career, I believe, right?
Yeah, totally. So there's only one dude in the NBA from New Zealand. And so, you know, being a New Zealander myself, followed him his whole career. So we're into his 11th season. But actually, as you know, the coverage of guys like Steven Adams in the league is pretty average. No one really does the deep dive, and no one really understands his impact. So that was the whole reason behind setting up the account, so that we can, get a sense of what he's doing, even though he's technically a role player.
I love it. Well, first off, technically a role player might even just be a disservice to a guy who's been a part of some really impressive teams throughout his NBA career. And again, I know we're going to get into some numbers here a little bit later on. I'm sure you've got some juicy stats pulled up to share with our audience. But, he impacts winning at a pretty high level and does a lot of things that I feel like go maybe fly a little under the radar for some, basketball fans out there. Again, I'm a big proponent of screening, and I cannot wait for us to talk about that part of the conversation and how that's going to impact other players on this roster, namely one Jalen Green and some other electric high-flying guards that Steven Adams has had the honor of playing with throughout his career, who he also helped with some of his on-the-court abilities. But let's start with just kind of coming in. Expectations for Steven Adams this upcoming season, right? This is going to be an interesting kind of change of pace for Adams in the sense that he's been a starter throughout his entire career, right? Where now he's going to be in a role where he's a reserve. He's going to be coming off the bench for the first time, I beleave, since maybe his rookie season, I think. And then he basically became a full-time starter.
Exactly, yeah. So it's definitely a re-establishment year, right? He hasn't played since January 2023, so he's had 18 months of basically no 5-on-5 ball. And even just now, he's only just coming out of protocols from his knee surgery rehab. So, he's going to have to work it back in. So being a backup isn't, the worst possible scenario for him, but it is going to be a new arrangement. So, I think expectations wise, he's going to use the first few months to get back in the flow, to do the things he's always done, to get that chemistry going with the team. But I expect that he's going to bring that impact that he's always had, just in a different context off the bench.
Yeah, I think too, being able to, when you're coming into a team where the team's best player currently is playing at the center position, right? You're, looking at a role for Steven Adams where he could be playing as few as, 10 minutes a night off the bench, depending on how much, they want to run Sengun, or maybe, run some small ball lineups with Jabari Smith Jr. getting some minutes at the 5, or even this past season, right? They ran Jeff Green a lot at the 5. So there's going to be situations where, Steven Adams on a low night could get something like 10 minutes. On a big night, depending on matchups, things like that, he might get, anywhere from 15, 20 minutes a night. But that's kind of, I think what we're looking at as far as his expected contributions coming off the bench. I want to get into here. Let's talk about this first area of his game that I think is going to be so important for fans. And we're going to revisit this. We're going to probably bring this up at various points throughout the podcast. But one of the things that I was most excited about the Rockets getting Steven Adams for is he provides them this massive mountain of a man presence, right? We talk about different archetypes, different styles of players in today's NBA. The Rockets haven't had a true big like Steven Adams in a long time. A guy who is arguably maybe still the strongest player in the NBA. You've seen so many GIFs and videos of him literally just like manhandling like other giant human beings. Like when what was the guy? Who did he pick up and carry away from the scrum years ago? Was that like Derrick Jones Jr.? I think it was, maybe.
Man, why have I got a name blank here?
I think it was somebody on the Bulls, and there was like a scrap, a scrap, and so I think it was Derrick Jones Jr. who he literally
it wasn't Derrick Jones Jr. I don't know why I'm having a mind blank here. It's like I've got videos running all through my feed on it. I'll come back to you.
It's okay. You know what? The name will pop up at some point. Point is, Steven Adams gives the Rockets something that they haven't had at that 5 spot. They've had switchable, long distance 5s. They've had Alperen Sengun, who's a passing phenom, but maybe a little undersized at the 5 spot for certain matchups. Steven Adams gives them that like mountain of a man as the backup 5.
Yeah, and look, I mean, before we get into this detail around the screening and things, let's just be clear on one thing. So I think people look at Steven Adams' scoring stats and look at his physique and go, okay, he's going to impact more on the defensive end than the offensive end. But actually, if you look at his career, and in particular his time with the Grizzlies, he really transformed their offensive efficiency, their offensive output. So when Steven Adams arrived at the Grizzlies, they rated 15th in offense in the season beforehand with Jonas Valanciunas. They then lifted to 4th, and that was really what boosted them into being the number 2 seed. And you might go, okay, there's a whole bunch of people contributing to that. But if you look at their offensive rating with Adams on the court, it was a 120, and with him off the court, it was 113. And that positive swing of plus 7.5 was the highest impact on offense of the whole team. So he has this track record of impacting offense, and it does come through a whole range of things. We'll talk about the passing, we'll talk about all sorts, offensive rebounding and getting those second chance points. But the screening is actually really important. And a lot of that comes from him, the on-ball initiation, the space creation, but it's actually about the people that he's around. And that's what I'm really excited about with the Rockets, okay? Not everybody can manipulate ball screens. We talk about Russell Westbrook, we talk about Ja Morant, people that actually have a jumper that's a bit questionable, but have athleticism that can just maximize space and become more efficient when they have space off screening. And so Steven Adams is going to be such a perfect fit with this Rockets team. You've got so many players that fit that archetype, that mold of, paint scoring first, athleticism off the charts. And actually, if they are given a little bit of space from Steven Adams screening, it's going to open up that aspect of their game. So Steve-O's, he's a bit different to your traditional, people go, oh, he's not a stretch 5. He doesn't take the outside jumper. So therefore he's going to be, he's not creating space for players.
He's a space killer, that kind of thing, but that's not the case.
No, right. So every team he's played on thrives in the paint. He carves lanes. There's no such thing as going over a Steven Adams screen, right? You get
crushed by a Steven Adams screen is what happens.
Yeah, so players inevitably go under. If they try and fight over, they're definitely going to get that space. If they go under, he's setting seal screens. He's covering off his big and doing the Gortat screen. So he's going to bring that space, those options for the athletes, guys like Amen Thompson. We'll talk about Jalen Green, but even Fred VanVleet. He's going to. I don't know how much they're going to play together, but he's going to enjoy that space that he gets.
That's going to be. It's so refreshing to hear that, because this is a Rockets team that they adopted the identity and the basketball philosophy of their new head coach Ime Udoka last season. They became a top defensive team in the association, but the one area that they definitely really struggled with throughout the season was their offensive efficiency. Right, they ranked 20th in the NBA in offensive efficiency for the entire year. They were 23rd pre-All-Star break, and then that number went up post-All-Star break to 15th. But generating good, high-quality offense was a big issue for this team, namely because when Alperen Sengun went to the bench, they no longer had a good screening presence on the floor. I love Jeff Green, love Uncle Jeff, love Jabari Smith Jr. at the 5 in spurts, but neither of those guys could create screens that really opened up and allowed the ball handlers for this team I guess the space or the separation from their man to be able to generate good downhill offense. And that was an issue that we saw play out time and time again last season. It got even worse when Alperen Sengun went down due to injury, because then they really didn't have somebody out there. And now thankfully Jock Landale was able to kind of step up and kind of shore things up a little bit. But that's going to be one major area that the Rockets do have this season, is there's not going to be a drop-off in the big man kind of screening or our offensive initiation presence going from Alperen Sengun to Steven Adams. Want to get into some of the specifics on how he'll help some of the other guards on this roster, as well as we got to talk about his passing, his rebounding ability. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Look, you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little bit different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5, just $5, and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. So head on over to FanDuel.com, take a look at some of the wagers that are available, take a look at the NBA Finals favorites, NBA Cup, or potentially Rookie of the Year, where Reed Shepherd right there, head-to-head, tied up with Zach Edey, plus 600 to win Rookie of the Year. Go wager on that, and then get yourself free access or a free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket. Just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Chatting all things Steven Adams right now with FunakiStats. You can follow on Twitter again at FunakiStats. All right, Funaki. So I think one of the areas that we start looking at how Steven Adams is going to help this Rockets team, kind of unpacking what he brings to the table offensively. We talked a little bit about the screening there. We're going to get more into it, I think, talking about how he really is so beneficial to some of those downhill, like uber athlete guards, which the Rockets have so many of on this team. But I'm also, I think at times, and maybe not even at times, I feel like his passing is a really underrated skill where people don't realize just how effective of a passer Steven Adams is, both whether it's, hitting guys on little backdoor cuts right at the rim, or even in DHO situations out on the perimeter. Again, setting one of those dribble handoff screens and be able to clear up a lot of space for guys to knock down shots outside.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a good reason why people don't credit him with that passing abilities, because it's really been late in his career that he's developed that and actually been asked to do it. So he's only had 32 or 31 games in his whole career where he's had more than 5 assists. All but 6 of those have happened in the last 2 years. And he had a triple-double with the Pelicans. So this has been a late evolution of his game. And it was really the Grizzlies that created this expectation that he was going to operate out of that high hub, which I know, the Rockets do that with Sengun. But he's going to hopefully continue to touch the ball a lot and get some reps in that high hub. And as you say, handoff. So guys like Desmond Bane, he went from being 60th in the league in handoff scoring to top 5. It really unlocked an aspect of his game. And you can see, there'll be guys in the Rockets team that benefit from that same passing ability. And, we talk about passing ability. Guys like Adams, the handoffs, just from being a big body, but he does actually have genuine passing creation ability. You talked about the backdoor cuts. He can find guys. He is the master of the backdoor bounce cut. You'll see guys, getting to the rim frequently because he's always looking for that. He calls it kind of the read and react, right? When he's got the ball, he is just reading what the defense gives him. And I think the Rockets play a similar style where it's just going to be actually if Reed Shepherd's got someone right up on him, taking away a shot, which is inevitably going to be the case, that backdoor bounce pass just opens up all sorts of scoring options, and it's the same as what Desmond Bane experienced. So yeah, his passing also is a focus. When he gets an offensive rebound, he's not like your Mitchell Robinson where he's going straight back up to put it up. If it's not an absolute gimme, he's kicking it out to three-point shooters. He's got that passing ability. He led the league in 21-22 in assists off offensive rebounds. right? So he's not a putback guy. He's a create for others off offensive rebounding. So, that passing dynamic plays out in lots of different ways.
As a random aside here, just bringing up the offensive rebounding, I am one stat that I could guarantee you right now that the Rockets will lead the NBA in this upcoming season, assuming Ime Udoka allows them the opportunity to be aggressive on the offensive glass. When you've got Steven Adams, Tari Eason, and Amin Thompson all on the same team, I cannot imagine another team that's going to out offensive rebound this Houston Rockets squad this upcoming season.
If there was a way of putting money on that, and I was a betting man, I can almost guarantee it. Steven Adams creates his box out gravity, right? So 2 or 3 guys always trying to box him out, even though he's still getting 4 or 5 offensive rebounds a game. That means that other guys eat on the offensive glass. Jaren Jackson Jr. used to talk about that all the time. He creates so much attention on the box out, but he's never really played with 2 other guys that are beasts on the boards in their own right. So you put those 3 guys there, no one's going to know where that box out focus needs to sit, and they're all going to just feast on the boards. I think that's guaranteed. And just tying those 2 things together, right? People don't appreciate how difficult it is, how rare it is in the NBA for someone to be both, an elite passer and an elite offensive rebounder. So there's only ever been two guys in the NBA that have had a season of 15 or better percent for assist percentage, or a 15 or percent or better offensive rebound percentage. Steven Adams and Charles Barkley. He set records for, that combination of assists and offensive rebounds in the season. It's a rare skill set.
Yeah, that's elite company if you're going to be there with the round mound of rebound. Look, and kind of building on the rebounding conversation, but shifting to the defensive side of things, I think one area that we actually saw the Rockets and head coach Ime Udoka make a point of emphasis for Jaylen Green this past season, and one area that we know has been part of Steven Adams' game in the past, namely with Russell Westbrook in the past, was the idea of him kind of doing the dirty work, boxing out on the defensive side of the court, right? Creating all that attention, and then allowing his guards, his uber athletic guards, to be able to get and secure those rebounds and get out in transition and run. That was a point of emphasis from Ime Udoka to Jalen Green last season, which was, I want you to go rebound. I want you to take that ball and then get out in transition, and having some minutes and some rotations and lineups where you have Steven Adams out there to command all that attention and allow those opportunities to kind of ignite those fast break opportunities for Jalen Green, for Amin Thompson, for Cam Whitmore. That is going to be really exciting to watch this next season.
Yeah, and it plays out in 2 ways, right? So yes, he's happy to do the dirty work and box out for his guards. We saw that, with Russ and with Ja. Actually, he is undeniably the dirty work MVP, right? The only guy to ever lead the NBA in total offensive rebounds, box out, and screen assists. No one else has done that. So he loves it. It's part of his game. He takes pride in it. But when he does get the defensive rebound, if it comes his way, like he doesn't care about them, but if it does come his way, you look at Ja Morant's highlight reels where he's out in transition and he's putting posters on Jakob Poeltl and all those things that we all know. Look who's making that outlet pass to Ja at halfway, right? So as soon as Steve-O's securing the board, his guards, his athletes know to get out and run. He's going to find them. He's one of the best long ball passers in the game alongside Jokic and Kevin Love, another underrated aspect of it. None better than, even though it wasn't an outlet pass off a rebound, but none better than the pass that Steve-O had from the inbounds at the end of a quarter. Or was it at halftime, I believe it was, to Ja in the opposite corner, and then he goes up and nails the little jumper. I forget which team it was against. You know which one I'm talking about, right? Yeah, the longest assist in the history of the NBA, right? Baseline to baseline.
Is that actually the longest assist in the history? Wow. Okay.
I mean, it's a kind of fake stat, right? Because you don't need it by the feet. But he threw it from behind the inbound, and he was like 2 feet on the other inbound. It's tough to beat.
The most elite thing about that clip is especially when he launches the ball, and then you see, and it lands for Ja, right? And Steven Adams puts his hands behind his back, just posing, and the camera angle where you can see it all play out from directly behind Adams is just chef's kiss. It's one of the best highlights I've ever witnessed.
Well, do you know that's actually probably the only reason I've got any following on Twitter is because that replay where the camera was behind Steven Adams, where it showed how relaxed he was, that only played in New Zealand through Sports Centre Australasia, and I saw it and I was like, it was a week and a half later. And so I clipped it up, chucked it on the account, and it got 150,000 likes, 12,000 reposts, 15 million views. And I got all these followers just jumping on board.
There you go. So that's how the clout started for Funaki right here with off of all that one clip. No, I'm sure there were plenty of people still indulging themselves in the Steven Adams propaganda well before that clip took place. But we've kind of looked at some of the offensive stuff here. I am curious at this stage in his career. Adams is a guy who's defensively he's held his own for a large portion of his career. He's been, at least at one point in his career, I think he was, sort of involved in some DPOY conversations at one point, but not like anything significant, not like top 5 voting or anything. But how do you expect him to just, react, I guess, this season defensively? Like, what kind of a defender are the Rockets getting out of Steven Adams, I guess, at that 5 spot?
Yeah, so he's he's a good rim protector, but he's not elite level. Where his defensive prowess comes to the fore is just being able to hold down the big bodies, the opponent bruiser bigs. He's so strong that he can just hold down any low post opponent. So your Jokic, your Embiid, your whoever, the guys that, to be honest, Sengun is going to struggle to hold the defensive end against. He can do that, which then means that you don't have to send doubles. Your guys like Jabari Smith Jr., whenever they're playing as the big combo, he's going to be able to play in that free safety role, and he's got a huge amount of upside on his rim protecting numbers are looking pretty good. So, look, it just means that you can play straight up one-on-one on those bigger opposing centers. And that's something I think, to be honest, the Rockets have struggled with. I have highlight clips of Steven Adams going to work in the post, and I didn't realize, but a lot of them are against Sengun. So that defensive limitation, I love Sengun. He's an awesome player, but let's be honest, that's not his strength. I see he's bulked up, he's got more size, and that might help, and let's hope it does. But it's very much a complementary defensive presence.
Yeah, and you bring up the idea of him, being paired with Jabari Smith Jr. in some of those kind of second unit lineups. I fully believe that's something that we're going to see from Ime Udoka this upcoming season. We saw various points last year where he opted to bring Jabari Smith out as one of the kind of the earlier subs in the game, and especially with Tari Eason back and ideally, healthy, knock on wood, all that good stuff this upcoming season. Then I fully believe that we're going to see a lot of Steven Adams, Jabari Smith Jr. minutes in that second unit, if anything, because even allowing Jabari Smith Jr. to potentially get in on the action, running some 4-5 pick and roll with Steven Adams could have the potential for some really interesting offensive outcomes when you have a shooter like Jabari Smith Jr. who could also benefit from some of the screening presence that Adams provides, just like we were talking about with the guards.
No, definitely, I'm really excited about that combo. He brings that floor spacing. He'll be creating space for him. I think it's going to work really well. And he's young and he wants to learn. And Steve-O takes guys like that under his wing. He'll see the potential for I know they're different players, but that Jaren Jackson Jr., a big guy that stretches the floor, that's got defensive tendencies, they'll work well together. Hey, look, do we have time to just talk a little bit more about the Jaylen?
Of course, no.
Situation.
First off, of course we do. We have Funaki. We have all the time in the world to talk about everything that you want to talk about, but we're going to get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, Funaki brought it up because I was being a bad host because we glossed over what I think is one of the biggest impacts that Steven Adams will have this upcoming season, and that is his two-man game with Jalen Green this upcoming year. We saw Ime Udoka run Jalen in a lot of different ways this past season. We saw him, leave him in and continue kind of getting a lot of reps with the starting lineup. Then we saw various stretches where he was in charge of running the second unit with, all 4 second string guys. And I do think that having Steven Adams out there as a presence to pair with Jalen Green in particular is going to be one of the things that hopefully unlocks a lot for Jalen this upcoming season, the same way that in the past it has for Ja and for Russ. And who better than to help illuminate us on how this is going to help Jalen than you, Funaki?
Yeah, well, it's this is really exciting because we all know that we want to see Jalen take an efficiency leap, right? And if you look at Ja over those 2 years that they played together, with Steven Adams off the court, he averaged 37 points per 100 possessions at about pretty much bang on 50% efficiency without Adams on the court. When he was paired with Adams, the efficiency lifted to more than 53%, and it was 41.5 points. So, significant jumps in both output, but his usage stayed the same, right? 34%. But we've got a really different dynamic here with the Rockets, where actually when with Sengun and Jalen Green on the court together, his usage is only at 25%, right? And he's averaging 28 points per 100, and he's at that exact same efficiency level as Ja was at 50%. What's interesting with the Rockets is that with Jalen off, and I know this was impacted by that March run, and it's difficult to know, what's chicken and what's egg here. But last season with Alperen off the floor, that his usage climbed from 25% to 32%. His points went from 27 points per 100 to 34. Okay, massive uplift in actual scoring output. But his efficiency stayed the same. And I looked deeper at this and I thought, okay, so how do we get this efficiency? When is Ja at his most efficient? And actually, when is Jalen at his most efficient? And it was in the minutes he was sharing with Jock Landale. 55% efficiency was his effective field goal at 38 points. And when he was small ball without Sengun, he didn't do so well. That drops way down to 46% efficiency on the effective field goal percentage. So Jalen has this track record of doing really well with a low usage bruiser big, the closest version you've got to with Jock Landale, whose job is to try and get your guy better looks. And so Steven Adams is going to bring that. And if I was Amir Doka, I would be looking at, okay, if Steven Adams is only going to play 15, 20 minutes a night, pair that as much as possible as you can with Jalen, because his attitude is going to be, right, you're my guy. You're going to be getting 35% usage. You're going to get all these shots up. I'm going to create space for you as much as I can. He shows through the stats that he's most efficient when he's got that big man creating for him.
Yeah, and I think that Jalen has shown that, unfortunately, through this point in his career, he hasn't quite, I guess, developed into, I guess you would think, the off-ball presence that his pre-draft profile would have believed that he could turn into one day. A large portion of that is because he just hasn't had that consistent outside shot at this point, which is also why last season you saw, as Ime Udoka started to take the training wheels off this team, he started to entrust and empower Jalen a lot more often with the ball in his hands, because you have a guy like Fred VanVleet who can be that off-ball floor spacing threat from beyond the arc. So then what else but to put the ball in Jalen's hands and just let him get downhill, run the offense. And credit to Jalen, he has grown and improved considerably as kind of a decision maker, as a playmaker, as the guy who is conducting and pulling the strings offensively. But I find it fascinating that you bring up, right, the numbers and I guess the success, because in a vacuum, you would think that a guy like Jalen Green and a guy like Alperen Sengun should be a match made in heaven and should perfectly complement one another. But it doesn't seem like, as far as the numbers suggest, that that's not the case, because, Jalen needs the ball in his hands, essentially, and so does Sengun. And unfortunately, at this point, there hasn't been a great way to, I guess, marry those two players together.
Yeah, well, I think Jalen's at his best when he can choose when in the position he has the ball in his hands, when he's the guy making the options. He's not secondary to a Sengun, Fred pick and roll. I don't think these are competing things. I think they'll work it out and they'll be able to play together in an efficient way. But if your sole focus is on how you maximize Jalen's efficiency, you pair him with someone like a Steven Adams, and even a Jock Landale. They perform similar roles here, and I think you'll be amazed at what you see.
And I think one of the other things that, I as far as just looking at hopefully Jalen Green taking the leap this next season, you start to look at comparisons, and obviously Russell Westbrook is a completely different, physical specimen than Jalen Green is from just a build perspective, his athleticism, all that. Obviously, these two guys are incredibly athletic, but I do love that Jalen and Ja are a lot more similar as far as their builds, as far as how they attack defenses, how they get downhill. I think Ja has a lot more creativity in his game and is a little bit more comfortable with his handle at this point. But you start to make those comparisons. You can see, okay, if Ja is able to have the level of success that he did as kind of a bit of an undersized, kind of wiry, scrawnier guard, then Jalen should be able to emulate at least a fraction of that same success if he's able to employ some of the same kind of things that Ja did to be able to do it.
Yeah, and it impacts on the jumper as well, right? So Ja was a much better shooter when Steven Adams was creating space for him, because Jalen's the same. He shot league average 37% when he had 2 to 4 feet or more space from his defender, right? His numbers tanked when he had pressure and that space was taken away. So Steven Adams is going to create that space for his shot to get a look where he can hopefully get higher shot diet of, above league average shooting. I think that's a realistic expectation. Desmond Bane, again, different archetype, and he's a flat out shooter. People don't realize that he shot 41% over the last 3 seasons, 46% when he shared the floor with Steven Adams, 38% when he was, without Steven Adams, and that replicated across the whole team. He impacts 3-point shooting. In fact, nobody has impacted 3-point shooting more for the Grizzlies as a franchise player than Steven Adams, completely counter to what people would think.
And again, bleeding back into the conversation earlier about the Rockets desperately need to improve their offensive efficiency. Did an episode the other day where we highlighted and talked about all the Rockets 3-point shooters on the roster. If Steven Adams can come in and have a similar impact the way that he did with the Grizzlies, then the Rockets should be in store for a much, much better offensive season. Also, shout out to Rockets assistant coach Ben Sullivan. Hopefully he's been putting in work with the guys in the lab this summer as the quote-unquote shooting guru on the roster. But Funaki, before we kind of move, because I want to make sure that we don't speed run past this. We could sit here. I'm sure we could talk for hours about what Steven Adams could bring to the table for this team. Is there anything else from the on the court perspective that Steven Adams provides that we haven't quite tackled yet today, or anything else that you want to bring up to let fans know about him as a player, since you've been following him so closely throughout his career?
No, look, this is the most selfless guy in the NBA, right? He's going to come into the squad, and his sole job is going to be, how do I amplify this young core? And there's not too many guys in the NBA that do that, right? He's just going to come in, he's going to spend time with this core, and he's going to say, right, when we're on the court together, how do I get everything out of you? And that's a pretty exciting disposition to have in your veteran center, right? Nothing about him is about stats, but as a result, he's one of the highest impact guys in the league. So when he's on the court, you're going to see young guys flourish. You're going to see people excited to be working with him and partnering with him. And I think that's just going to play out over the next 6 months. We'll talk about the trade deadline soon, because I don't know what that future looks like, but let's just make the most of it while he's here.
Absolutely. And look, I want to highlight here, and I believe I mentioned this, well over a year ago when Dillon Brooks was originally on his way to the Rockets, right? These are two former teammates, right? These are two guys who were, staples for the Memphis Grizzlies. And in a way, they were the locker room leaders, at Memphis, just taking on a lot of that kind of the leadership mentality role, or kind of taking on the personality of some of the guys in the locker room. And I remember finding out, or kind of, hearing through the grapevine that, with some of the stuff going on in Memphis, there were two guys that were in particular kind of frustrated with some of the locker room dynamics at play in Memphis. And it was Dillon Brooks and Steven Adams, who were kind of on the same page about wanting guys to be a little bit more serious, wanting guys to, behave a little bit more maturely. And so that's kind of rich coming from Dillon Brooks, who is, has this whole villain persona and everything. But I do think that the Rockets are getting yet another veteran locker room leader and anchor in Steven Adams, a guy who is going to help, again, be one of the adults and be one of the voices in that locker room to help carry the messages from the coaching staff, from Ime Udoka, to all these younger guys. You can't ever have too many vets when you've got such an incredibly young core. And so him kind of getting folded in with, Fred VanVleet, Dillon Brooks, and Jeff Green, very excited from that perspective. And I'm very excited to just talk to the guy. I haven't had a chance to actually interact with him yet, as from a media perspective. So that's going to be a ton of fun. One other thing I want to bring up here, and you kind of mentioned this the other day on social media, is I don't think, now I will say, if the Rockets come out of the gate and if they look incredible, if the season's going well, I highly doubt they do a shakeup or they do anything at the deadline. However, I do think it's worth noting, right? Steven Adams is a guy that is potentially, assuming he comes back and he's healthy and he's thriving in his role backing up Alperen Sengun, this is a guy that could very easily be on the move at the trade deadline this upcoming season. The Rockets do still have Jock Landale, who is a more than serviceable backup big man, and Jock is currently kind of buried on the depth chart behind Sengun and Steven Adams, so who knows how much he even plays this upcoming season. But I think there is a world where if Steven Adams is excelling and he's thriving in this role, and potentially if he wants to be back in a position to be a starter on a team that is truly contending, then that is something that the Rockets might have to explore at the trade deadline. Are there any teams that come to mind, Funaki, that are kind of would be in need of a center like Steven Adams that you could potentially see as future trade partners for the Rockets?
Yeah, I'll get to them in a sec, but I just wanted to pick up on what you're saying there, because it's really, it's an important dynamic, right? Is He's an unrestricted free agent at the end of the season, and the Rockets are going to want to get value, right? They're not going to want to have that situation where he just walks for nothing, because he's got opportunities and he's got offers. And if he does get back to starter level Steven Adams that we've seen the last couple of years, he's going to have those opportunities, right? He's going to be attractive for teams. And it also comes at the time when the Rockets are wanting to potentially start thinking about a significant consolidation trade, right? They've talked about going elephant hunting and big game hunting and trying to find, what is another superstar that you can add to the mix, whether it replaces one of your young core or is just additive to it. You're going to have to consolidate. And so a $12.5 million, matching salary, someone that is attractive to other teams, that has a reputation either off the bench or starter, is really valuable in that scenario. Whether or not the Rockets want to pull the trigger on that at, the January, February trade deadline, I don't, who knows? That's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But that would be when they would recoup the most value. But I guess they'll test that with extension offers and just seeing where Steven Adams heads at and whether he wants to stick around. They might be able to overpay and keep him and keep him as a future trade asset. But, teams like the Lakers, the Knicks, the Pelicans, the Warriors, I say the Pelicans, it's probably unlikely that he heads back there, but they're the sort of top of the list of teams that are struggling with their center depth.
Just don't have a center, right? So that's a little problematic for New Orleans.
Yeah. The Lakers, there's no secret that AD thinks that he's the best he can be when he's got a bruiser big next to him. They're talking about Jonas Valanciunas. Man, if I had the pick of those two and I wanted a high-impact center, I'm taking Steven Adams every day, and we've seen that play out in Memphis. Good player, will get you buckets, but he's a cone, and it's, there's no comparison between those two in terms of impact. The Knicks, they need a Hartenstein replacement, and that archetype of Hartenstein and Steven Adams isn't too dissimilar. If he was battling with Mitchell Robinson for minutes there, who knows who ends up being the starter there if he got traded to the Knicks. And even the Warriors, right? Like they've always run the Draymond at the 4, the small ball at the 5. But guys like Kevon Looney and others, they had less impact last year and years prior. So, there's teams out there that want to continue to be close to contention, that are happy to take on shorter term contracts, 31-year-old guys like Steven Adams, and with a sort of a win now mentality. So I think he's going to have options if he's back to 100% in terms of his impact.
I will say, if I could have my pick of timelines for the Houston Rockets, I'm choosing the timeline where everything works out perfectly and Steven Adams is great in Houston Rockets jersey, and they're able to iron out the details on a long-term either extension or future contract situation. I would love to see Steven Adams be able to stick around long-term with this Houston Rockets young core. I think he's exactly the type of kind of veteran piece that you want around guys like this. But ultimately, it's going to boil down to what does Steven want? Because if he wants to get back into a role where he's in a starting caliber role where he truly is contending for titles, even though this Rockets team is on the upswing and they'll have their, kind of contention window, probably not within the next year or two, but they'll be on the rise, in the Western Conference sooner rather than later. Maybe he doesn't want to wait around for that, but this is exactly the kind of guy that you could see kind of anchoring that second unit and being a great locker room presence for these guys for years to come, especially if you're able to get him on he's making $12.5 million right now. Maybe if it's something, conservatively, like $15 million across, $15 million a year for multiple seasons, something like that. Something in that realm might be enough to get the deal done if he likes the environment, if he likes being in Houston. So we'll see how it all plays out this upcoming season. But Funaki, thank you so much for stopping by, joining the program. Any parting remarks before we get you out of here?
No, thanks for putting the spotlight on Steve-O's game. It's great for me to be part of the fan base with Rockets. I love the interactions. It's been great seeing how this all plays out. I'm really respectful of the team, right? Because I just come to this as I'm here as like a ship in the night. I'll come and I'll go. But for you guys, you've been through the tank, the rebuild. I can see how excited the whole fan base is, and it's just really, really nice to be plugged into it all. So looking forward to doing the season with you all.
Likewise, I know we'll definitely have to have you back on here at some point. Look, I can guarantee it right now. Steven Adams is going to have some kind of a monster like 10 plus, 12 plus rebound game like off the bench, or he's going to do something ridiculous this upcoming season, have a big game with a ton of impact. And that's when we bring you back on the show to gas him up and to share some more Steven Adams propaganda. See, what you don't know is his last 15 games, he averaged 10 points, 14 rebounds, and was dominant. Everyone thinks he's kind of washed. But, if he gets back to that, he's going to be a big part of this. I love it. Be sure to go follow him at FunakiStats on Twitter. Funaki, thanks so much for being a part of the show. All right. Cheers, man. That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.